The river was already wrong when the first boards went up. It moved with a thicker sound than usual, not louder, just heavier, like something dragging its belly through mud instead of gliding over stone. People noticed it, but no one said anything out loud. They were too busy watching Mara Ellison haul planks into the cottonwoods like a woman who had lost her sense. She was a widow before she was 30. That was the part folks remembered first. The rest came later, layered on top like bad weather. Her husband's grave sat upriver under a leaning cedar, and everyone knew floods loved to take what was already marked. When she began climbing instead of digging, laughter came easy. Tree house, they called it. Said it like a joke you could spit through your teeth. Mara didn't answer. She tied rope with hands already scarred from splitting rails, cinched knots until bark bit back, and kept climbing. The cottonwood she chose stood on a shallow rise, its roots half exposed from past seasons, thick as bridge beams and old as the bend in the river. She tested each limb with her weight before trusting it, not fearfully, practically. The first platform went up crooked. She tore it down and started again. People gathered the way they always did when someone broke from the shape of things. Men leaning on fence posts, women with baskets paused at their hips, children daring each other to throw pebbles. Advice drifted over like smoke. Build lower, build square, build near the ground like everyone else. A man called out that floods came once a generation, and only fools planned their lives around once-in-a-generation things. Mara hammered until her arms shook. She had learned what once meant. By the third day, the river had climbed its banks without spilling. By the fifth, it pressed flat and wide, swallowing willows at the edges. No one noticed because the sky was still blue and the air warm. Floods were supposed to announce themselves with storms. This one didn't. Mara noticed. She noticed the way ants moved uphill, the way driftwood began collecting where it never did before, the way her dog refused to drink from the shallows. At night, she lay awake listening to water talk to itself. She added cross-bracing. She hauled up barrels. She built a ladder that could be pulled free. The jokes sharpened. Someone asked if she planned to live like a squirrel. Someone else wondered aloud if grief had finally hollowed her out. A storekeeper offered to sell her nails cheap if she promised to build something real. Mara said nothing. She had learned early that explanations invited arguments, and arguments wasted daylight. Her cabin sat closer to the river than most, built back when land was taken because it was open, not because it was safe. It was small, one room and a lean-to, but it had held through winters and dry summers alike. She packed it anyway, moved flour and salt pork first, then blankets, then the iron pot her husband had carried west. Each trip up the ladder was measured, each bundle tied twice. On the 7th day, the river took the lower pasture. On the 8th, it took the road. By then, no one was laughing. They were too busy shoring fences, lifting furniture, arguing with the water as if it might listen. Rain finally came, late and sudden. A hard sheet that turned the world to noise. It fell upriver for days, unseen but felt, every mile of it sliding downhill with a single purpose. Mara stood in the tree and watched the line of brown creep closer to her door. She waited until night to move the last of it. The dog went first, trembling but obedient. She followed with a sack of dried apples slung over one shoulder and the rifle on the other. When she climbed down for the final time, the water kissed her boots. She did not go back. The river came fast after that, not as a wall, but as a patient thief. It filled cellars. It loosened foundations. It carried away the light things first. Chairs, coops, the false confidence that tomorrow would look like yesterday. By dawn, Mara's cabin was an island. By noon, it wasn't. She watched from above as the door tore loose, as the roof sagged and split, as a life she had folded carefully collapsed into floating pieces. There was no time to mourn. The water kept rising, and with it came things the river had been saving. Logs, dead animals, whole sections of fence traveling like battering rams. The cottonwood shuddered once, a deep groan that ran through trunk and branch. Mara pressed her palm to the wood and felt it answer, alive and holding. Down below, people began to run. Some tried to swim, some tried to wade. A man lost his footing where the road used to be and vanished without a sound. Children screamed from rooftops. Horses broke free and smashed themselves against debris. The valley that had mocked her now looked up. Mara did not call out. She tied another rope. She braced another beam. She waited. When the first knock came, wood against wood, desperate and clumsy, it was already too late for politeness. She hauled until her shoulders burned and her hands bled fresh. She pulled neighbors up by their wrists, by their collars, by whatever she could grab. She cut rope to make room. She shoved barrels aside to clear space for shaking bodies. The platform dipped and swayed, but it held. By nightfall, there were 12 of them in the tree, wet, silent, alive. Below, The river kept rising. The night stretched without edges. From the platform, the river no longer looked like water. It was a moving surface, thick and blind, carrying whole sections of the valley as if it were inventory. Fence rails struck the cottonwood and shattered. A dead cow spun once and vanished. Somewhere downstream, something large hit something larger, and the sound traveled up through the trunk and into the bones of everyone clinging to it. No one spoke unless they had to. They were packed close, knees drawn in, shoulders pressed together, the kind of closeness that came only when space itself had become a danger. Mara moved among them in slow passes, checking knots, tightening lashings, counting heads the way she once counted jars in her cellar. 12, then 13, when a boy scrambled up the ladder on his own, blood slicking one arm, eyes too wide to be useful. She tied him off without comment and kept moving. The cottonwood held, but it complained. Every gust set it swaying, not violently, just enough to remind them that nothing stood still anymore. The platform creaked with the sound of old wood doing new work. Mara listened to those sounds the way other people listen to weather. She could tell which ones meant strain and which ones meant adjustment. She wedged a barrel under a sagging corner, drove a wedge with the butt of her knife until the pitch squealed and the noise settled into something steadier. Below them, the valley made its own sounds. Shouts cut short, the crack of a roof giving way. Once a scream rose so sharp it seemed to slice the air, then stopped as if the night itself had swallowed it. No one asked who it had been. The man who had laughed loudest earlier in the week, the one who called her a squirrel, sat with his back against the trunk, face grey, hands wrapped around nothing. He did not look at Mara. He stared out into the dark as if the river had written something there he was trying to read. Hours passed in pieces. Rain came again, lighter this time but steady, soaking everything that hadn't already been soaked. Cold followed. People began to shiver in earnest, the kind that didn't stop when you told it to. Mara passed out blankets, then sacks, then the last of the spare shirts she had hauled up without knowing why. She set 2 men to rubbing the arms of an older woman whose lips had gone pale. She forced the boy to drink from a tin cup and slapped his cheek when his eyes started to roll. "Stay," she told him, not gently. It worked. At some point the ladder banged loose. A floating beam had caught it just right and torn it free of the lower hooks. It swung once, cracked against the trunk, and slid away into the dark. No one said anything, but the absence of it pressed in on them harder than the cold. Mara tied another rope. She did it slowly and deliberately, so they would see that she was not rushing. Panic made knots slip. She lowered it just enough to reach the platform below, then tied it off short so no one would be tempted to climb down. There was nowhere to go. The river peaked sometime before dawn. It did not announce the moment. It simply stopped climbing and began to argue with itself, currents colliding, debris circling in confused eddies. The cottonwood leaned into the pressure and did not break. One of its lower branches tore free with a sound like a gunshot, but the main trunk held, roots gripping whatever earth was left beneath the flood. When the light finally came, it showed a place no one recognized. The valley was gone, not ruined, gone. What had been fields were now a wide brown sheet. Roofs floated like broken boats. The road existed only as a memory of direction. The air smelled of mud and rot and something sharper that no one wanted to name. From the tree, they could see other survivors clinging to what little height they had found. A family on a grain shed roof, 2 men in a sycamore downstream, a woman waving from the second story of a house already listing. The distances between them looked short, but the water between was fast and full of teeth. Mara assessed it all without visible emotion. She had no use for it. She cut the rope shorter and retied it higher. She shifted weight on the platform, redistributing bodies the way you redistributed grain so a shelf wouldn't bow. She told the strongest men to sit where the trunk split, where the wood was thickest. She put the children in the center and wrapped them in everything that could be wrapped. Someone finally spoke, a whisper, hoarse and useless. "We'll die up here." Mara didn't look at him. She was watching a log spin past, measuring its speed. "Not today," she said. It was not encouragement. It was inventory. By midday, the rain stopped. The river began to drop, slow and grudging, leaving behind a skin of debris that clung to everything it had touched. The cottonwood stood in a new shoreline, its roots exposed like the ribs of something half buried. The platform sagged but stayed intact. They waited. There was nothing else to do. Hunger came quietly, thirst louder. Mara rationed what she had left with the same care she had rationed nails days before, small pieces. No arguments. She ignored the looks she got when she kept the rifle close. Desperation changed people faster than water. Late in the afternoon, a shout rose from downstream. A man in the sycamore had slipped. He clung for a moment, then lost his grip and was gone. The sound of it carried, even over the river. No one laughed anymore. No one mocked anything. As evening fell, Mara saw movement near where her cabin had been. Not floating, standing. A figure on a patch of ground, that had emerged as the water pulled back. Then another, people wading carefully, testing each step, moving toward higher ground. She tied the rope again, this time long. When the first rescuer reached the tree, soaked, shaking, eyes fixed on her like she was something unreal, Mara did not wait for thanks. She showed him where to tie off. She told him where to stand. She sent him back with instructions that were clear and unarguable. "Bring more rope, bring boards. Bring anyone who can still walk." He nodded like a man taking orders for the first time in his life. They did not all make it down that night. The platform was too crowded, the ground too uncertain. Mara chose who went and who stayed with the same flat certainty she used to choose what to carry on her back. The injured first, the children, the old woman whose breathing had steadied. When it was her turn, she went last. She climbed down the rope into mud that sucked at her boots and held until she wrenched free. She did not look back until she reached what counted for solid ground. Then she turned and faced the cottonwood. It stood stripped and scarred, platform crooked and empty now, rope ends hanging like loose threads. Around it the valley lay broken and exposed. People gathered behind her, quiet, changed. No one spoke of tree houses. Morning did not bring relief, it brought accounting. When the light settled fully over the valley, it showed what the night had hidden out of mercy. The river had pulled back just enough to reveal damage without apology. Houses lay on their sides like animals that had died where they fell. Fields were scraped down to clay and stone. Fences ended in mid-air. The smell had changed again. Less moving water now, more rot, more things that had been living yesterday. People moved carefully, as if the ground itself might still betray them. They spoke in fragments, calling names that did not answer back, counting heads with the same quiet dread Mara had known too well in other seasons. Someone found a body tangled in brush and covered it with a coat. Someone else found nothing at all and kept walking as if motion alone might fix it. Mara did not wander. She went straight to where her cabin had stood. There was no ceremony to it. She stepped through the mess of splintered boards and sodden furniture without slowing, eyes scanning, hands already reaching. The iron pot lay half buried in silt, cracked but whole. She pulled it free and set it aside. The table was gone. The stove lay on its back like a fallen animal, chimney torn away. She knelt once to retrieve a small tin box wedged under a beam, shook the water from it, and tucked it inside her shirt. That was all. Behind her, people hesitated. No one knew whether to speak to her now. She had been the odd one before. Now she was something else, and no one had the right name for it. By mid-morning, the work began in earnest. Survivors gathered driftwood, hauled bodies, tried to clear paths that no longer led anywhere familiar. A man with a broken arm was laid out on a door. Someone built a fire from wet scraps and cursed it for smoking more than burning. Children sat in small knots, quiet in the way that frightened adults more than crying ever could. Mara took charge without announcing it. She pointed, she assigned, she cut arguments short by not engaging with them at all. When two men insisted the road would reappear if they dug long enough, she redirected them to building a shelter instead. When a woman collapsed into the mud sobbing, Mara put her hands on her shoulders and said nothing until the sobbing ran out on its own. The cottonwood remained where it was, platform still attached, ladder gone, rope dangling. People avoided looking at it directly, as if it were a witness that might speak if pressed. By afternoon, hunger sharpened into something edged. Food stores had been soaked or swept away. Livestock losses were worse than anyone admitted out loud. The storehouse downriver had collapsed, spilling grain into water that claimed it without effort. A man suggested rationing what little remained. Another suggested taking from those who had more. Mara listened. Then she spoke. "We'll eat what we can save today," she said. "Tomorrow we hunt. We fish, we dry what's left of the corn that isn't rotten. No one takes from anyone else without asking." Someone scoffed, quietly, but enough. Mara turned her head and fixed him with a look that carried no threat, only fact. "You can argue," she said, "or you can help, but you won't steal." He looked away first. That night, they slept in clusters on the highest ground they could find, wrapped in damp blankets, fires burning low and smoky. The river whispered nearby, no longer raging, just talking to itself the way it always had. People flinched at every sound of water on stone. Mara did not sleep much. She sat with her back against the cottonwood, rifle across her knees, listening to the tree shift and settle as it adjusted to its new burden of exposed roots and damaged limbs. She pressed her palm to the bark once, briefly, then withdrew it as if embarrassed by the impulse. In the days that followed, the valley learned new rules. Nothing went back to where it had been. They built temporary shelters first, then slightly less temporary ones. They salvaged what the river had not ruined completely and let go of what it had. People who had never spoken more than greetings before now shared tools and food because the alternative was unthinkable. They also talked, not in speeches, not all at once, but in low voices while working, while waiting, while staring at ground that no longer trusted them. They talked about the night in the tree, about the way the platform had swayed but held, about how Mara had moved without panic, without hesitation, as if she had known all along where they would end up. Someone called it foresight, someone else called it luck. Mara ignored it all. On the 5th day after the flood, a group of men approached her while she was stripping usable boards from a collapsed shed. They stood awkwardly, hands empty, hats in hand, like boys about to ask for something they had no claim to. "We've been talking," one of them said. About rebuilding," she waited. "We were thinking higher ground this time, or at least farther from the river." She nodded once. "That would be wise." Another man cleared his throat. "There's talk of building up instead of out, using trees where it makes sense, platforms, lookouts, storage, in case it happens again." Mara pulled a nail free and straightened it against a stone. "Talk costs nothing," she said. "Wood does." They shifted. "We were hoping you might—" "No," she said, not unkindly. "I won't build it for you." The disappointment was immediate and poorly hidden. "But," she continued, "I'll show you what holds and what doesn't, if you listen." They listened. Over the next weeks, the cottonwood became a place of work rather than spectacle. Mara showed them where to tie without cutting into living wood, where to brace so weight traveled down instead of out, how to account for sway without fighting it. She did not romanticize it. She pointed out the failures, the splits, the places where luck had mattered more than planning. "This won't save you from everything," she told them. "Nothing will. But it might save them from this." Not everyone approved. Some called it overreaction. Some said floods like that didn't come twice in a lifetime. Some rebuilt where they always had, close to the river, close to habit. Mara rebuilt too, but not the same. She chose ground that rose gently away from the water, and close enough to the cottonwood that its presence still mattered. Her new shelter was smaller, tighter, easier to leave behind if it came to that. She kept the tree house as it was, crooked, scarred, functional. She stored food there, rope, a spare ladder, coiled and ready. Children began climbing it when adults weren't looking. They treated it like a game until they were told what it had been. Then they treated it with the seriousness children reserve for things that once scared grown-ups. Late one afternoon, weeks after the river had settled back into its banks, the man who had called her a squirrel found her there. He stood with his hands jammed into his pockets, eyes on the platform overhead. "I was wrong," he said. No apology wrapped around it, just the statement. Mara nodded. She did not say she had known it already. That night, as the valley slept under a sky scrubbed clean by disaster, the river flowed quietly past, contained but not tamed. The cottonwood stood watch, roots gripping what remained, branches lifting toward a future that would not look like the past. Mara lay awake, listening, not afraid, not because the danger was gone, but because she had learned where to stand when it came. Time did what it always did after disaster. It thinned the memory without fully erasing it. The river returned to its banks, narrowed again, learned how to look harmless. Grass pushed through silt in stubborn patches. The smell faded. New fences went up, straighter than the old ones, as if precision alone could keep the water at bay. People laughed again, carefully at first, then louder as weeks passed without incident. But the valley did not go back to sleep. There were changes you could see, and changes you could only feel. Houses sat farther from the river's edge now, even if no one admitted that was why. Food stores were split, not kept all in one place. Ladders leaned against trees where no ladder had leaned before. Rope appeared where rope had once been considered excess. And above all of it stood the cottonwood, its crooked platform no longer a joke, no longer a spectacle, but a reference point. People used it when they spoke about the flood, gesturing toward it without thinking, the way you gesture toward a scar when telling a story that still lives in the body. Mara did not make herself central to any of it. She rebuilt her life the way she rebuilt everything else, in pieces small enough to carry. Her new cabin stayed spare. She refused help she didn't need, and accepted help she did without ceremony. She split her stores between ground and height, habit now rather than strategy. The rope stayed coiled by the door, dry and checked each week. Some nights, she woke convinced she heard water where there was none. Those were the nights she climbed. She never announced it. She never took a lantern. She climbed by feel, by memory, by the sound of bark under her palms. From the platform she could see the river curve away, moonlight breaking on its surface, peaceful in a way that felt like performance. She did not trust peace that worked so hard to be seen. Others began to notice. It started with small things. A boy sent up to fetch stored grain. A woman climbing carefully to hang meat where dogs couldn't reach. A pair of men repairing a brace without being asked. The treehouse became a place you went when you wanted something safe without making a speech about fear. Then one evening, the clouds came wrong. They did not roll in heavy and dark the way storms usually did. They stacked instead, high and layered, holding light in ways that unsettled the birds. The air thickened. The river did not rise, but it changed its voice, slipping into a faster rhythm, less patient than it had been. Mara noticed. She always did. She checked the rope. She checked the barrels. She checked the joints, where old nails had been bent straight and reused because that was how things were done now. Everything held. Still, she packed. Not everything, just enough. The storm hit upriver first, unseen but announced by the way the ground drank too fast. Rain came later to the valley, hard and short, pounding without ceremony and moving on. People told themselves it was nothing. They had lived through worse. They had lived through the worst already. The river rose overnight, not like before, not violent, not hungry, just steady. It slid up its banks and over them with a confidence that made argument feel childish. By morning, it had taken the lowest ground again, creeping toward places that had been spared the first time. This time, there was no laughter. People moved early. They lifted, hauled, climbed. Children were sent up before fear could complicate obedience. Animals were tied higher. Boats were pushed free instead of argued over. The cottonwood filled again, not with panic but with motion. Mara stood at the base and directed traffic like a woman who had done this before, because she had. Someone asked if they should be afraid. Mara considered the question while tying off a line. Yes, she said, but not uselessly. The river did not peak as high as it had before. It did not need to. It made its point quickly and withdrew just as quickly, leaving behind only shallow damage and deeper understanding. A shed lost, a stack of firewood soaked, no lives taken. When it was over, people did not cheer. They looked at one another instead, sharing a recognition that would have sounded like exaggeration a month earlier. If they had waited, if they had argued, if they had trusted the old patterns, the thought ended itself. From then on, preparedness stopped being a private concern. It became communal without becoming ceremonial. No meetings, no declarations, just quiet alignment. When someone rebuilt low, they were helped anyway, but a platform appeared nearby soon after. When someone scoffed, they were ignored rather than corrected. Mara watched it happen from the edges. She did not want a following. She did not want credit. She wanted people to survive without needing her to tell them how. The man who had once mocked her the hardest began building his own platform that summer. He did it poorly at first, fighting the sway, overbracing until the tree complained. Mara watched for 3 days without comment. On the 4th, she walked over, tapped a joint with her knuckle and said, "That'll split come winter." He nodded and redid it. No apology, no thanks, none needed. Years passed. The valley aged around the memory of the flood, but it never fully buried it. Children grew up hearing about the night the river climbed without shouting, about the widow who had built where no one else would, about how high ground didn't always mean solid ground. Some of those children left, some stayed. Those who stayed learned the habits without being told they were lessons. Mara grew older in the way people who work with their hands do, strong longer than expected, then suddenly tired. She climbed less often at night, trusting the rope to stay ready, even if she did not touch it every evening. Her hair went grey without ceremony. Her movements slowed but did not soften. One autumn, when the river was low and honest, she found rot in one of the old beams. She stared at it for a long time before acting. The platform had held through more than anyone had expected of it. It had earned its rest, but things that earned their rest were also things you did not abandon without replacement. She dismantled it carefully, saving what she could, lowering pieces by rope so nothing fell uncontrolled. People noticed and came to help without asking why. They worked quietly, on her hands passing boards the way they passed food now, without fuss. When it was done, the cottonwood stood bare again, scarred but lighter. In its place, 2 new platforms rose, not in one tree, but in 2, higher, better braced, built with the lessons paid for by loss rather than theory. Mara supervised and corrected. She did not lead the work. When the last rope was tied, and the last knot set, she stepped back and looked at what the valley had built for itself. It was not pretty. The river never apologized. It slid through the valley the same way it always had, narrowing and widening with the seasons, carrying silt and memory in equal measure. To someone passing through years later, it would have looked ordinary again, picturesque even, the kind of river settlers liked to point to when explaining why they had chosen the land. Those who had stayed knew better. They did not speak of the flood often, but it shaped their days all the same. It lived in how they stored food, how they chose ground, how they watched the sky when clouds stacked the wrong way. It lived in the quiet agreement that no shelter was complete unless it had somewhere higher to go. Mara Ellison lived long enough to see that agreement become instinct. By the time her hands began to stiffen in the mornings, platforms dotted the valley like punctuation marks. Some were rough, some carefully built, some little more than widened branches with rope and planks lashed tight. None of them were laughed at. Children climbed them without being told not to. Adults checked them at the turn of every season, tightening knots, replacing boards before rot could argue. No one called them tree houses anymore. They were simply there. Mara's own days grew smaller, though no less deliberate. She tended a modest patch of ground, kept chickens again once she trusted the river enough to risk them, and spent long afternoons mending things that did not strictly need mending yet. She still walked the river's edge when the water was low, studying its curves, listening to its tone the way others listened for news. She still noticed first. When her legs finally refused the ladder one autumn, she did not fight them. She sat instead at the base of the nearest platform and watched the valley work. Young men she had once hauled by the collar now moved with practiced efficiency. Women who had shaken in the tree now directed others with calm authority. Children born after the flood played beneath the platforms, as if they had always belonged there. Sometimes, someone new arrived. The valley still drew people who believed land was a promise rather than a negotiation. They came with confidence intact, asking questions that had been asked before, laughing at the same things, skeptical in the same familiar ways. Mara never corrected them. The valley did. A sudden rise, a night of rain that hit upstream and nowhere else. A reminder delivered without cruelty, but without compromise. The newcomers learned quickly, or they left. Near the end, Mara's world narrowed to a few steady rhythms. Mornings by the fire, afternoons in the shade, evenings listening to the river talk to itself. She did not grow sentimental. She did not record her thoughts. She did not believe the valley needed a story to remember her. On her last spring, the river swelled again, not dangerously, not even unusually, just enough to wet the lowest ground and remind everyone that it had not forgotten its path. People moved automatically, lifting, climbing, adjusting. The platforms filled briefly, then emptied just as easily. Mara watched from her chair, wrapped in a blanket that had been with her in the tree that first night. Someone offered to move her higher, just in case. She shook her head. Not necessary, she said, and it wasn't. When she died, it was quietly, between one breath and the next, with the river audible through the open door. There was no drama to it, no warning, just absence where there had been presence. The valley paused. Work stopped for a day. Fires burned lower. People spoke her name aloud in the way you do when testing the truth of it. They gathered near the cottonwoods, old and new, and stood without ceremony. I was unsure how to mark the passing of someone who had never marked herself as important. In the end, they did what she would have done. They checked the ropes, they tightened a loose knot, they replaced a weathered board, they made sure the platforms would hold. Someone carved her name into a beam where it wouldn't be seen unless you were already up there, hands on the wood, trusting it with your weight. No date, no praise, just the name, small and steady. Years later, children would ask why the platforms existed at all, why the valley bothered with them when floods were rare now, when the river behaved itself most seasons. The answer was always the same, though the words changed. Because once it didn't, because someone noticed before it mattered. Because survival, when shared, stops looking like fear and starts looking like sense. And because when the river rose without warning, there had been a widow in a tree, hammering while others laughed, building a place she hoped would never be needed. And when it was, it held. The river kept flowing, the valley kept standing, and no one ever mocked a tree house there again.